Okay, I think we'll get started 2 minutes past 1. Hello everyone and welcome to the virtual ESI. I'm actually in the building along with about 2 other people on this very hot day. My name is Caitlin and I am the sort of main host for this gathering, but the co-host, guest host is Natalie Pollard, who I'll hand you over to in a moment. But just before we get started, you are in the Arts, Culture and the Environment in Cornwall session, which is the third in a series of 3 events that have been running over the last year. And the focus of these has been to try to bring out some of the richness and diversity and dynamism of interdisciplinary work that's happening, particularly around our Cornwall campuses. And Stefan Bohm ran the first 2 within this ESI's umbrella, and we are now running the third. And in my role as the Associate Director for Transdisciplinary Research in the ESI, I'm holding the series, and we'll be doing so going forward. And we decided that a productive way to carry on with this series was actually to have a series of different guest hosts. So instead of the ESI convening all these conversations, what we're doing is we're inviting other academics to put themselves forward as guest hosts for the series, and to host a 1-hour conversation with other researchers and creative people across who we work with across the campuses. And so in this case, Natalie Pollard has stepped forward and offered to be our guest host for an amazing collection of talks, which I'll let Natalie introduce the speakers, but I think just before we get started, I just want to make sure, thank a couple people. Should flag that while we're in a virtual ESI, this event is actually being hosted collaboratively with Arts and Culture Exeter and also with Penryn Humanities. So this is a truly transdisciplinary event. And there are some people who've been working in the background very hard to make this happen. Rita Sharma and Gemma Lucas particularly, maybe invisible, but this wouldn't have been possible without their input. So I'm now going to hand it over to Natalie to introduce herself and the speakers, and also to give us a sense of the theme that we're going to be exploring today. So here you go.
Thanks, Caitlin, and welcome everyone. Welcome to our summer event, which is themed Arts, Culture and the Environment in Cornwall. And as Caitlin says, this is a 1-hour session and a collaboration between Arts and Culture Exeter, Humanities Penryn and the ESI. And it's also designed to speak really broadly across the disciplines, as well as to our wider public and to our past and present students. So yeah, today's session is part of this ongoing series, a collaborative series of like snapshot or lightning talks across the sciences and arts and hums. And for those who haven't attended earlier sessions, the way that we're going to run this event is inspired by a concise and quite striking method, which involves each of our presenters talking through 20 slides for 20 seconds of commentary. So today we have 4 speakers and each talk will last exactly 6 minutes and 40 seconds. I'm told the structure gives an effect for audiences which is a little bit like visual haiku. I'm thinking of titling these sessions Snapshot Chats, but I'm very open to people telling me that's a terrible idea and suggesting better things. But what I really hope that we'll be able to do here is give everyone a real taster of the range of the diverse interdisciplinary projects taking place and their significance and their methods and their insights. And to really just have a kind of semi-formal space for us to get together and get to know more about this range of projects that's happening in Cornwall in a way that sets up playful and dynamic and ongoing conversations. As I say, this theme is arts, culture and environment in Cornwall. My background is I'm a senior lecturer in contemporary literature, so I work in the Penryn Humanities department, and we really thought it'd be great to bring people together across the disciplines to think about how this touches on arts and cultures in Cornwall. And obviously the theme of the environment. So a real range of really exciting speakers we've got today. So 4 talks. At the end of our 4 talks, there'll be loads of space to ask questions, make comments, instigate dialogue of any kind. And as we go through, please do feel free just to type in questions, ideas, whatever comes up to you in the chat, as long as it's polite, as they arise to you, and we'll pick that up at the end. So first of all, at 1:10, in a couple of minutes, we'll have Associate Professor Victoria Tichler, who will discuss creativity, mental health research and public engagement, looking at multi-sensory approaches to dementia care. And then we will have Dr. M.A. Lay, a creative writing lecturer at Penryn, who will be speaking about earth humanities, contemporary poetry and performance, the arts and humanities with and in science and technology. Then we have arts producer Claire English, who will talk about the Catalyst exhibition, a celebration of a decade of the ESI Creative Exchange Programme. And finally, we'll have Dr. Elsa Hesse, who will be speaking about how microbial behaviour can help in the cleanup of metal polluted environments. And just to remind you, I think you probably have seen as you checked in, this session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed to the ESI Facebook page. So, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Victoria. I'll just do a brief intro for you, Victoria, before you get going, but feel free to load your slides up as I'm talking, and then we'll just effortlessly segue into your talk. So Victoria Tichler is an Associate Professor in Public Health, Sustainability and Environment at the University of Exeter and an Honorary Professor at the University of West London. Victoria's research interests focus on creativity and mental health and multi-sensory approaches to dementia care. She is co-executive editor of the journal Arts and Health, an international journal for research, policy and practice. And she's worked as a curator in the outsider arts field. She serves on the scientific advisory board for Boots, UK Archive, and is the advisory board member for the Hamway Festival, University of Global Health in Rwanda.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Can everyone see my slides? Right, I shall kick off. So I'm going to talk to you about key points in my career and how they've developed my current research portfolio that focuses on mental health, creativity, and multisensory approaches to living with dementia. I'm a chartered psychologist. I grew up in Australia, where I completed my first degree, and there I spent formative time in asylums, old style ones that had moats around them. And feeling out of my depth, I started to create art with the patients there, which started my interest in this field. I've also worked outside of academia in the arts, and there I undertook research and curatorial activities where I gained a deep understanding of working in collaboration with artists and creative practitioners. And I also discovered more about untrained or outsider art. This artwork is by my favorite untrained artist. His name's Adolf Volfly. He experienced a deprived childhood in Switzerland and spent most of his life in the Waldow Asylum. There, encouraged by his psychiatrist, Morgenthaler, he began to create complex visual art, musical scores, and creative writing, and he's now one of the most venerated untrained artists. These works by the artist Bill Utemolen have really inspired my work. They express more about the condition of dementia than words ever could. Utemolen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and began a series of self-portraits, examples of which you can see here, vividly charting his psychical and physical decline due to the condition. My expectations are often surpassed when working creatively with people living with dementia in care homes, hospitals, and the community. There's often unintentional or gallows humor used by those with the condition. And this has been an inspiration to artists such as the surrealist Leonora Carrington, whose play The Hearing Trumpet features a 92-year-old protagonist in a residential care home. I describe myself as a transdisciplinary scholar, and this involves an entrance into and immersion into other disciplines. This is the entrance to the Schönes Haus, or the Lovely House, at the Department of English Literature and Linguistics in Basel, where I spent some time as a visiting scholar and experienced there a transformation in my thinking and practice, which altered my career trajectory. And immersion sometimes means dealing with imposter syndrome and moving outside of your comfort zone. This project, Brexit Means Brexit, was commissioned by an arts research and curatorial collective that I'm part of called PSY, featuring the Kandoko Dance Company and choreographer Farah Saleh. And on the right-hand side, you can see me actually performing in one of the performances of this deeply personal piece, which deals with the grief and trauma following the EU referendum result in 2016. I always like to think big in terms of impact, particularly around public engagement. This sculpture is called House for a Gordian Knot, and I commissioned and project managed it, as well as raising the funds to commemorate the opening of the Institute for Mental Health in Nottingham, where I worked for many years. It weighs 9 tons, and I think it stands to a testament of the importance of mental health, and also the importance of developments in mental health practice and research. This powerful image is by an artist called Mary Bishop, who was a patient at the Nevin Hospital in the 1930s. It was featured in an exhibition I curated called Art in the Asylum, which charted the diagnostic and therapeutic use of art in British asylums. And her images were later used as part of a Mind campaign to raise awareness about mental health. Bishop was an untrained artist. Sometimes collaborations in this field can come from unexpected sources. So this image is from a collaboration with a fashion company called The Unseen, where we used discarded garments, which were customized by untrained artists and by Royal Academicians. They were exhibited in central London and then auctioned off and raised money for arts and mental health charities. Collaboration can also exist in unexpected spaces. I like the idea of exhibiting in mundane or everyday spaces as you reach different audiences. This image is from a collaboration with the retailer John Lewis, where we exhibited artwork made by people living with dementia in their cafes up and down the country. So food, it's universal. Most of us love consuming food and drink. It's also social and brings people together. One of my projects called the Imagination Cafe has found food and drink as a central element. And the cafe is a pop-up installation with food and drink designed for people with anosmia, loss of smell, and dysphagia, which is difficulty in swallowing, often experienced by people with dementia. The Imagination Cafe has taken me to lots of interesting places, including art galleries, market squares, and also rugby stadia. So this is an image you see of me with players from the Harlequins Rugby Club, where they've embraced this Imagination Cafe event and have regular rugby themed events for retired players and socially isolated older people near the stadium. I think that creative practice works in many different ways for people with dementia. It brings the expertise and skills of artists into care settings. It also showcases the creative capacity of people with dementia and opens up an interesting space for people to talk about a really feared condition and challenging negative stereotypes about it. As you heard in the introduction, I'm a co-executive editor of an international journal, which gives me really privileged access to the latest research in this burgeoning and growthful field of arts and health. I'm currently leading a pandemic responsive project called Culturebox, which co-designs and commissions and sends creative materials to people with dementia across England. And these are to stimulate social interaction and to alleviate social isolation and loneliness. Here are some images of artworks that we've commissioned for Culturebox. So on the left-hand side by the artist Renata Kulacek is Mendy-inspired artwork, and on the right-hand side is a dance piece by the dancer and choreographer Akim to St. Buck. So the objects are both physical and digital that we send through Culturebox. This is another artwork that I've displayed in lots of exhibitions that I've curated by people who are untrained. And I think it's called My Psychiatrist's Answer to Everything. I think it's another powerful image and also a playful message about mental health, giving people the opportunity to share their experience and start conversations about mental health. Finally, I work with a number of industrial partners, and these are items from the Boots Company archive. And collaboration with them means we can explore olfaction or sense of smell with people with dementia using their products. And I'll finish with the words of one of my research participants, a woman in her mid-80s who'd attended a creative session, and she said, "I feel like my brain has been polished." Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Victoria. If perhaps we could join in thanking Victoria for her talk. I'm going to try and use my emoticons to say thank you and well done. Next, I'm going to introduce Amay. Amay is a lecturer in contemporary literature and creative writing here at Exeter in the Penryn Humanities department. And her poetry combines DIY production with text and performance. And they received her PhD in English and practice-based research from Royal Holloway, University of London. Two good things to look out for. One is Amaze 2011 collaborative poetry collection, Feral Citizens. And next year, especially look out for her forthcoming book, Eretric Schlock with Broken Sleep Books in 2022. I hope I pronounced that correctly, May. I'm very excited for that one. So yeah, without further ado, let me hand over to you.
Can everybody see that all right?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's get started. My Twitter AVI image was taken in a bathroom, and I suddenly remember this because normally Twitter crops out the toilet in the lower right-hand side of the photo. So I used the picture in a square format for this event, and the toilet was visible, and so it made me think a little bit about Duchamp. And it also made me think about waste. The visible is really important. There are some things that are simply hard to understand if we don't see or hear them, but these things, unfortunately, are often hidden or concealed. Some of the most important things in life are the things that we cannot see. So I think a lot of the work of the arts, particularly as it relates to the environment and decolonization and place, is around that question of a focal point and making something visible that was previously not visible. And so this is the Memphis sanitation employees strike. Where do you look? What do you know? How do you make sense of what you're seeing? And furthermore, when things are not easy to see or to envision, how do we cope with that experience? This is from Marina Abramovic's performance where she had people blindfolded and wearing headphones. At the same time, neo-colonial relationships persist, not just in the questions around stories we tell and symbols we use, but the physical and social processes of production, extraction, and exchange that power our global economy. This is a Google facility, and these facilities use billions of gallons of water, sometimes in dry areas that are struggling to conserve this limited public resource. So when we think of our data, obviously it's hidden, but we don't see the waste, the hidden waste that is being produced by the kind of cloud computing that's going on. And so perhaps this returns to the question of waste and making waste visible. So I wrote this pamphlet called A Waste, while living in an ecological protest site near Heathrow Airport to protest against the airport expansion. So in the last kind of 2-ish years of my PhD, that's kind of what I was doing. And this period gave me insight into some of the experiences and byproducts of living in the UK in the shadow of a major transport hub and some of the kind of vertical inequalities that exist in some of the wealthiest places in the world. So the UK is one of the top countries in the world in terms of wealth, but it's also one of the top in terms of wealth inequality. Asthma rates and other pulmonary illness in the Heathrow villages were substantially higher due to air pollution in this region, especially among children, and life expectancies were reduced proportionally to how close they were to the airport. This is just one of many examples of how working class and poor populations are located at particular flexion points in the economy that often put them at physical risk in different ways. So these are agricultural workers continuing to work to pick food for us in the California wildfires in 2018. All over the world, but also right here in Cornwall, we can see this kind of severe inequality, which is often linked to health problems and bodily issues. So this is Don Gardner from Camborne Pool and Redruth Food Bank, which was receiving up to 750 visitors per day at certain points during the early stages of the pandemic. It isn't an accident, for example, that New York police tried to attribute Eric Garner's death to pre-existing conditions like obesity and asthma. So this is from an arts project where children were drawing pictures of people who had been killed in police violence and trying to kind of humanize victims of police violence. As a working class Black man, Eric Garner was statistically more likely to suffer from health problems due to the proximity of environmental harms in his environment, as well as racist police violence. And this is a kind of altar that's been set up at the site where Eric Garner was choked to death. The poet Ross Gay has written a memorial poem depicting Garner in the act of digging in plants, because he was also a horticulturalist for the New York Parks and Recreation Department. And so this poem memorializes Eric Garner in the act of digging in plants in his capacity as a horticulturalist. The question of the laboring body is relevant to art and to artists because in our work, our labor is valued and visible. It's understood that we put something of ourselves into our work and that the efforts of our brain, sinews, and nerves contribute to the work's value. So this is another durational performance Marina Abramovic put on in Greece with a series of 7 artists doing different kinds of durational performance. But this effort expended is true of all human work. In some sense, the worker could be seen as an unfree artist who throws him or herself into production, but without being able to choose how or what he or she produces. So this is an image of a silver person in Indonesia. So that's people paint themselves in this silver paint, which is also highly toxic. Oops. Oh, sorry. So this is where Earth Humanities comes in, the question of opening these unseen processes to us and making them easier to grasp and more tangible. So this is the Stan's Cafe Theater Project, visualizing statistical information through the use of rice grains. So thinking about population in a way that's tangible. The arts and humanities give us ways of observing, articulating, and reconceptualizing the very limits of our world. Art has the ability to pose the most important questions of what we might be losing and what we value. And so this is a work by an artist, Henrietta Simpson, who's working with us on an Earth Humanities research grant around kind of loss and landscape imagery. And art also asks us to think about what we don't want to see. So this is the poet Xu Lixi, who was a worker in a Foxconn factory. And so I'm working a lot with his writing. And he also worked in producing iPhones and some of the digital technology that we use. Okay, thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Emma. I am going to flip the order of events because Claire English is having some technical difficulties. So let's hope that she can join us by the end. I hope that doesn't disrupt you too much, Elsa. Are you ready to go?
Yes,
I'll do an intro and then maybe in that time you'll have time to load up your slides.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So yeah, let me introduce Elsa Hesse, who works as a research fellow with Angus Buckling at Penryn campus at the University of Exeter. She obtained her PhD in evolutionary ecology from the University of Freiburg in 2006 and went on to postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Oxford and at Leiden University. Elsa's current research examines how we can manipulate microbial behaviour to help in the cleanup of metal polluted environments. And she uses art science collaborations to help convey the important role that microbes play in our life and how we can harness their metabolic diversity to our benefit. So thanks, Elsa, whenever you're ready.
I can't, can you hear me?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yes, okay, good, sorry. So yes, thank you for introducing me and also giving me the chance to talk a bit about my work and my journey towards several art science collaborations. So my background is in microbiology and plant ecology. And over the last decades, it's becoming increasingly clear that bacteria do not occur in isolation, but they actually interact with many others, and they've evolved various ways, behaviors to interact with other species. And this is an important process that determines how well ecosystems function. And it also determines, for example, soil health. So what I'm interested in is how mining impacts soil health. So mining waste poses a global threat to ecosystem and human health. And these mining wastes, they often contain multiple toxic metals that are detrimental not only to us, but also to the environment. And in the next couple of years, mining waste is projected to further increase because of the demand for carbon clean technologies such as solar panels, but also electric cars. Up to now, physical mining waste is mainly physically and chemically remediated, leaving a huge imprint on the environment. So there is an increased demand for developing more sustainable and clean technologies to clean up mine waste. And it is perhaps not surprising that scientists have thought about using microbes to clean up metal waste, because these microbes are metabolically very diverse and they have evolved various ways to deal with toxic metals. As you can see from these pictures, microbes are not only very interesting, but they're also extremely pretty. So in terms of remediation, researchers have mainly looked at how individual microbes might help us to clean mine waste. But this is a little bit too simplistic, because actually different species might help each other to detoxify metals. And this is basically the main focus of my research. I'm also interested in how microbe-microbe interactions determine the way that they interact with plants. And this is not only of fundamental interest, but it might also help us in cleaning up metal waste by developing ways in which we can increase plant metal uptake. So I'm based in the ESI, and this is a really great supportive research environment, which brings together people from many different fields. And this is where I came into contact with different people to develop art science collaborations. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ESI established the Creative Exchange Program in 2013. And this program aims to facilitate collaborations between creative practitioners and researchers who share an interest in issues of environment and sustainability. So this piqued my interest, and my co-worker Paweł Sierosinski introduced me to Fleur Winter, who is a ceramicist working and teaching at the Leach Leach Pottery. And basically, we established a collaboration to highlight how the Cornish mining industry has had and still has an impact on the environment. So we sat together, made a bid for the Creative Exchange project, and we were very lucky to get this funded and start collaborating. So what we did basically is we had a chat with Fleur, and we came to the conclusion that a lot of these glazes that she uses use some metals to alter the nature and the quality of the glaze. And I had lots of different soil samples that were contaminated with lots of different metals, which I collected locally at the Paradise Valley, which is a former mining site. So we came up with a project to see is what happens if you combine these different soil samples in the glaze, what happens to the quality and the nature of the ceramics. So she used my glazes, and then also to bring it back towards the lab, she used a lot of my different labwares that I use, like Erlenmeyer flasks and beakers, to make molds and make porcelain ceramics. She then used this as a base to do different glaze test firings. And what she did is she either combined the soil in the glaze, or she pressed soil in the glaze, and then she fired it under different circumstances. So oxygen rich and oxygen depleted conditions. And that had a different effect, a subtle different effect on the quality and the nature of the glazes, as you can see here. So this was a very enjoyable collaboration. And based on that, it sparked my interest to collaborate with another person to convey a different message, which is basically how microbes make decisions to either help or harm other species. So this was basically, I went to the Eden project
where there was this beautiful exhibition called World in a Drop, which showcased microbial diversity. And I bumped into Tim Cockrell of Falmouth University. He's a lecturer over there, and he specializes in macro photography. So we got chatting and we came up with the idea to look using macro photography to look into more detail in how bacterial colonies are structured and how they spread over plates. So for my work, I've plated out lots of different bacterial communities, and they all look different in their colony morphology, how shiny they are, and how opaque. But what I also noticed is that some of these bacteria, they form these really intricate, beautiful patterns when they spread over agar plates. And that got me wondering, because I saw that these patterns differ when the bacteria grow with different species. So that got me wondering whether these species can actually use environmental cues from the environment to inform their swarming behavior. So what we did is we very simply mixed, this bacterium is called Penibacillus. So we mixed these Penibacillus with a lot of different other soil isolates that I've got. And then we let them swarm over a plate. And then Tim made beautiful macro photography pictures using very complicated methods, which I won't be able to repeat now. But what we found is that if you use all these different mixes, you end up with lots of different swarming behavior and morphologies. And I try to highlight by just focusing on 3 of these different mixes. So this is the Bacterium variovorax. It's a plant growth promoting bacterium. And when it's growing alone on a plate, it forms this beautiful pattern. But as soon as you mix Penibacillus with it, its behavior changes completely. So now variovorax, which is the yellow colony, can't swarm over the plate, while Penibacillus does swarm. And this depends on whether this strain actually has the ability to take up iron from the environment. Using a different strain of Penibacillus, we find that this iron scavenging strain helps variovorax to spread further over the plate. This is still work in progress. So I'm still looking at all these different dynamics, but it does highlight that it's very important to understand why different species might help or harm each other and how we can manipulate these interactions to our own benefit. Thank you. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Elsa, for that. We are still waiting on Claire English, who I sincerely hope will be able to join us by the end. But perhaps a good thing for us to do in the meantime is to go straight to questions and start a kind of dialogue. And then I hope that Claire will be able to join us and perhaps talk us through. And Caitlin has just put in the chat the link to that wonderful exhibition that Elsa was talking to us about. So please do check that out. So yes, here I have all 3 of my wonderful speakers today, and please do feel free to type questions, ideas into the chat, or jump in now if you have things you have a burning desire to ask. I can see Catherine's hand up. Please do feel free, Catherine.
Yes. I'm trying to put video on so you can see me talk, but my question is for Elsa, because that was fantastic. I actually really loved that. What I particularly like is, you know, the photography techniques are revealing scientifically the behaviors of bacteria and their interplay. So I want to sort of ask you, you know, how do you take that forward? Because obviously, if we're looking at cleaning up toxic mine waste, we want to promote the growth of beneficial bacteria. So that the feedback loops, which bacteria actually promote the activities of the consuming habits of bacteria. How do you actually turn that into action and progress for remediating mine waste?
That's a very complicated and difficult question, because I think there's a reason why people haven't done it, because it's a lot of work. So I think we first need to establish conditions under which bacteria can actually help each other better. So does it depend on how much nutrients there are in the environment? Can we give them nutrients to make them collaborate more to detoxify metals? Or are there other conditions like mixing, which might help species to come into contact to one another more? Does that help them detoxify these metals? And then the next step would be to clean up the metals. You would actually need something to extract them from the environment, and people have started using plants to do that. So if we can manipulate microbial communities in such a way that plants take up metals more easily, that would be a way forward. We know a little bit about that from individual species, from individual bacteria. A lot of these species produce compounds called siderophores, which can bind heavy metals, which makes the metals more available for plants, meaning that plants can suck them up more easily. We don't know anything about these dynamics within whole communities, and that is something, a project that I'm actually currently starting to do to find out under what conditions is this siderophore production maximized, and how does that in fact plant microbe interactions and the way plants take up these metals from the environment. Those are the first steps I can envisage to help come up with more clean remediation strategies. Currently, it's basically metals are either stored in mine tailings if they're liquid, or they are just dug up, stored somewhere, or people pour concrete to make them less, move less into the environment. But if we can use the microbes that are already there, that would be an option to more sustainably detoxify metals.
Thank you.
So I can see that Nicola and Sarah have their hands raised. Should we go in that order?
Hi everyone, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating to listen to. I was really struck. I was just trying to tap it into the chat box, some sort of question. I'm not sure that I really have a question as such, but more a point of reflection. I was really struck, Victoria, by what you were saying about the transformative nature of your research, of entering and immersing oneself in other disciplines to follow, I suppose, approaches, methods, learn, I suppose, other frameworks of knowledge. And I suppose I was just wondering whether Elsa and Emma could reflect on that as well and just talk about your experiences, and maybe Victoria would like to come back, but just to think about the transformative nature of interdisciplinary work. And the impact. So yes, not a really well-formed question, and maybe Sarah has a better one, but yeah, that's what I was really struck, got me thinking there.
Thanks for your comment. It's not for everybody. You have to be quite brave, I think. And not that way of working might not be for all academics, but for me, I felt quite constrained in my academic role, and I felt like I couldn't really do justice to parity with collaborators without that kind of immersion. But, you know, I got quite a lot of pushback from my colleagues, you know, who questioned the logic and the sense making around that decision. So I wouldn't say it's a risk-free decision, but I'd be interested to hear what the other panelists have to say as well.
I can contribute maybe a little bit to that. So I forgot to say that the ESI provides a really supportive atmosphere that promotes such art-science collaborations, making it very low-key to actually partake in these collaborations. And I think it's great that this can actually reach quite a wide public. But the other side of the coin is that as a scientist, you're judged on your scientific publication output and the number of grants you get in. So most scientists won't be able to find the time to actually squeeze in these collaborations. So I think some of the funding agencies really want to promote pathways to impact. So that might change in the future, but for now it's more about your publications in nature science, the amount of money you get in, that you're being judged on, and not necessarily these kind of different ways of exploring the natural world and collaborations with other people.
I think for me, it's probably slightly the inverse in that if you're approaching something through writing, writing is always a medium that has to transmit some other thing in it, right? So it's inherently very much about things that are not writing. I mean, even if you go to like the most formalistic practices within arts that try to kind of exclude other ways of thinking or other, you know, questions about the real world or something, you're still dealing with the kind of reality base of the medium you're using. So even in the plastic arts, you're thinking about stones. Or I thought this Stan's Cafe project visualizing population data using those grains of rice was really interesting, because obviously they're just trying to use rice because it's a very easy to transport medium for each rice grain to represent one person, but also because they've chosen that medium that then speaks to all the questions around the biology of rice and the history of rice and how it's been used in different contexts, famine, etc. You know, like I think it's sort of the opposite in a way. When you're working in creative media, I think it's inherently interdisciplinary. And so the question is, how do you make that very visible? How do you kind of illuminate the fact that there are processes going on that are not just subjective processes, but that are social processes, political processes, economic, physical, biological processes that are going on, that are not just kind of me as a creator kind of saying things, but that are kind of shaping me as like a, you know, social, physical, economic agent or something like that. So I think it's sort of inverted, but it's still very interdisciplinary.
It's so interesting to hear you talk in that way, May, about this kind of sense of everything of arts and humanities being like always already interdisciplinary, rather than this like bolt-on thing that you add, you know. So I've had a lot of talk recently about an applied literary studies or an applied artistic methodology, as if things started off purely and only then were like muddied. And I really like the way that you're talking about I think this kind of there's no need to harness something which lies outside or beyond, but that it's always coming through. And I think that has really nice resonance with what Victoria and Elsa were also saying in different parts of their talks. I know that you have your hand up, Sarah, but I think there's a kind of almost like a follow-up that like Caitlin has put in the chat, and maybe we could like continue that conversation. Is that okay, unless yours immediately follows? As you'll see, Caitlin has said, this is mostly for May and Victoria, following on from Kate's question earlier to Elsa. It strikes me that you also must have stories about how your arts interventions have helped develop a more precise understanding of the behaviour of scientific subjects, systems, organisms, syndromes. Maybe that follows a little bit from the kind of conversation that we're having.
Yeah, just to qualify that a bit, I mean, I think what's fascinating there is the sense that in some of the most exciting creative exchange collaborations that we've had happen, the gain for the people who are working as researchers in the ESI from having that shift in perspective or more precise tools for understanding the behavior of the things that they're looking at, I think has been amazing. And so it's not, the arts have absolutely not been an add-on, but they've actually provided sort of an epistemological window, if you will. I think some of that came through already.
Yeah, just to respond, I mean, I think language is really important, and words like precision and subjects are words that I would resist. I find them quite problematic. And I think, yeah, I approach things with more of a curiosity, and also acknowledge, you know, I was trained in a very conventional biomedical framework, very positivist, but I have kind of resist that as much as I can. And also I'm really interested in working with artists to find different ways of measuring or assessing or evaluating, which give insights which may not be, you know, the conventional ones. But I am often asked, you know, what about ref? But I think there are choices to be made. And I think 10 years ago, arts and health, you know, was quite a sort of maverick field, but it's quite well established now. So I think that's less of a problem than it was. Yeah,
I mean, I think I might talk just in about one project that I've just been trialing with a friend who works in computer programming and is a software developer. We just made this odd poetic proposal, which maybe gives a good example. Thinking about Huntington's disease, which he's worked on in the genetic code of Huntington's disease, which is it comes about through repeats in DNA. Excessive repeats can cause that disease. We decided to subject a number of texts to a process of repetition, and to kind of take different forms of memory, human memory and artificial memory, to kind of improperly retain those texts so that they would mutate and repeat. And so I think in a way it's like you're sort of transforming, taking what we've learned about particular scientific processes and then thinking like, okay, how can we then apply it actually to language or storytelling or art subjects? And does that then give us another way of kind of then coming back to that original scientific subject and thinking about DNA? And does, in that situation, it gives us a way of thinking about evolution and the reason why DNA slippages and repeats happen that isn't kind of falling into like a pathologizing or eugenicist or kind of upsetting model of thinking about disease, right? So I think there's actually a lot there from the humanities and art side that if we're open as practitioners to actually learning from other disciplines and incorporating that within our work, that we can give back quite a bit as well, I think, from kind of the side of understanding how those things can kind of explore into like other domains of life.
Sarah, are you still there, and would you still like to ask your question?
I am. I saw Claire's with us. Is Claire, I don't want to mess up the system. Is Claire able to do her presentation? I can see you, Claire. Claire is here. Let me.
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, unfortunately, I've had terrible technical difficulty. So my presentation is currently reloading on the computer. So I don't really have anything to hand, but I'm very happy to we could look online at the Catalyst exhibition if you want, and I could just talk through some ideas about the kind of different questions I had and thoughts when I was creating the exhibition. So I don't know if you want me to try that. I don't know if you could bring up the exhibition online, and then that would be a way to sort of go through it, perhaps.
I can load it if you'd like. All right.
Thank you, Caitlin.
I just have to sort out the screen sharing. All right.
And thank you everybody for your patience as well. I guess I could just kind of introduce myself a bit while you're doing that. I'm Claire English. I think you've seen my face on the internet. And I've recently been working with the Creative Exchange on this exhibition, which is called Catalyst. What I planned to talk to you about today was really just to obviously kind of go through the context of this exhibition in terms of the Creative Exchange programme and my work with them. So the Creative Exchange, I've been working with them since around 2014. I think it started around 2013. And correct me if I'm wrong, Caitlin. And it's been working with academics from the Environmental Sustainability Institute to put on exhibitions in the small space, which is the Creative Exchange space. Which is inside the Environmental Sustainability Institute on the Penryn campus. So it's always good to kind of put that into perspective in terms of the kind of exhibiting history there. And I guess what I really wanted to talk about as well was the kind of context with which this exhibition sprung up. Obviously, we're in a global pandemic, and we decided that it would be a really good time to make a virtual exhibition. And one of the reasons for that is looking around at other stuff that's going on in the world in terms of digital. There's a lot of digital innovations going on. There's the non-fungible tokens, which have astounded the art world, which is all about digital art, which can be sold, and it's been sold for like 64 million, which is a record or something along those lines. And then lots of different kind of virtual ways that people are working. For example, there's been an exhibition which was all along the Thames of along the embankment in London, which was an augmented reality exhibition called Unreal Cities. And Hauser and Wirth have created their own virtual gallery. And there's been a massive production of kind of cultural digital content that's been placed onto the internet. So there was a moment where I kind of paused and thought, is this really the right thing to do? How are we going to make it relevant? What's going to make it different? How are we going to use the budget that we have to make this exhibition work? And so obviously we put out a call for proposals to see if we could have some past participants from the Creative Exchange programme. And this is all the wonderful artwork that they put forward and proposed. And we could, I mean, I don't know if you could, Caitlin, zoom in on Chris Thorne's work. That would be really good. I don't know if you can, that is around the other way, that's it. That's the one. If you just click on it or just zoom in on it, that's it. Brilliant. And Chris Thorne is, he was one of the very first creative practitioners to come along to the Creative Exchange. And I think that he engaged with a number of different academics, and it really informed his practice. He's actually a radiographer, and he creates these kind of amazing radiographs, which he's actually been used quite a lot in publications and articles, I think quite a lot in newspapers and all over the world. So it's been quite interesting to see his kind of further reach. And then following on from him, I don't know if you can do this, Caitlin. We've got Sarah Bowler and Sarah Marston, who's next.
I'm having navigation problems. Okay.
Technical difficulties.
Which one do you want?
Yeah, Sarah Bowler's one, that would be great. So yeah, Sarah produced a fantastic exhibition here. Sorry, I shouldn't say exhibition. I guess it was more like a program of events, a project where she worked in the Goonhilly Downs in sort of common land, and yeah, so yeah, it's quite, yeah, I'm really sorry, it's going to be really difficult for me to keep going too much further because I just don't have all my notes here actually. And I'm forgetting who's collaborated with who, but obviously this is really worthwhile going to have a look around the exhibition. And if you click on each piece of work, it has a complete description of each academic, the artist and their project that they did together. And then also, you know, the kind of the far-reaching elements of each project. So I don't know if you could click on one of those pieces. Oh yeah, I can't see, I can't read it. I can try, oh, I can read it, yes. Yes, so Sarah Bowler and Elizabeth Marston, sorry, I do apologise. and they worked with Dr. John Benny and Caitlin De Silva on their project. Yes, so it's definitely worth going in there and reading that in more detail. I do apologise, I don't have my notes with me, but it's a very interesting exhibition to look around. And I think that's probably the best I can do without my notes and things. But really, I think, it's been such an interesting experience to work with all the different artists, and there's many different elements of kind of digital working in terms of there's films, there's podcasts, there's augmented reality apps. And I feel like a lot of the projects, for example, Cornwall Climate Care have done some really interesting projects, which are now sort of research around climate and the environment, and they're producing a series of film which is all about the research that they've been working on and solutions to environmental problems as well. So it feels like it's much more hopeful than just highlighting all the difficulties that we have with climate and environment. So I think really I can't give you much more than that. But thank you for allowing me to show you around the exhibition, and please go and have a look if you get a chance, and read all the different collaborations and how the artworks have explored things. Caitlin, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more.
No, we only have 2 minutes, 1 minute. So I would encourage people to visit the exhibition, but also if you're curious about some of the collaborations that seeded the work in the exhibition, there should be a bit of thumbnail information about each of the projects we've hosted since 2013. And I just briefly, we are relaunching the Creative Exchange for next year, and we hope that it will have a bit more focus on supporting ECRs, so early career researchers and early career creatives, because as Elsa's work has shown, it's often that's where the most productive and interesting work happens, and that's where people can have the bandwidth sometimes to take on these approaches. So watch this space, and I hope some people from Falmouth joined us today. We invited our Falmouth colleagues to be part of this conversation. So Natalie, I will hand it back to you, but if anyone wants to be a co-host for a future event, just get in touch and we'll sign you up, and you can choose a theme and assemble your own fantastic collective of people.
Fantastic, thanks Claire, and thanks Caitlin, and it's great to see everybody here. There has been some very interesting discussion in the chat. Please feel free to continue that. We can obviously pick up these threads on a later date as well. Sarah, I know we never quite got round to your question. I don't know if you have a comment or if you wanted to say anything at all in the last 30 seconds we have before we say goodbye. You're welcome to do that if you want to.
Right, no pressure. What I find really exciting about arts and science collaborations, and I'm in the arts and culture team, and we tell these stories about creative process all the time through our programming. And I suppose the question was just about how university and HEIs are shifting, need to shift, and how much, and the frustrations that exist when this work is still pioneering even after a decade and there's more to be done. How much are these interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary projects pushing change within the institution? Academics are being more frustrated, and that will then drive change. And how much of this is coming from outside the institutions, that there's a recognition of the complexity of the problems in the world. You've got to find more holistic approaches, and your kind of siloed previous approaches to academia don't hold up anymore. And so maybe between that push and that pull, we'll continue to see more and more of this work come, because it's so exciting and there's so many benefits. So, and thank you very much for your presentations. It was fantastic.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone. Great to see you all, and more soon.